In 218 AD, the most powerful throne on earth was protected not by armored legions, but by an army of naked women trained to kill with their bare hands. What you're about to discover about Emperor Elagabalus will shatter everything you thought you knew about the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire controlled 65 million people across 3 continents. Its military machine was the most feared force in human history. But in the imperial palace, traditional Roman discipline was about to be replaced by something that would horrify even battle-hardened centurions. For 250 years, the Praetorian Guard had protected Roman emperors with military precision and unwavering loyalty. These elite soldiers were the ultimate symbol of Roman discipline and masculine virtue. But one teenage emperor would replace them with something that defied every Roman tradition. Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, Augustus, known to history as Elagabalus, became emperor of Rome at age 14. But this wasn't a child ascending to power. This was something far more dangerous, a teenager with unlimited authority and appetites that would challenge the very definition of human behavior. Before claiming the Roman throne, Elagabalus served as high priest of the Syrian sun god Elagabal, a deity whose worship involved rituals that Romans considered abominations against nature. These religious practices would shape an emperor who saw no boundary between sacred and profane. Elagabalus's rise to power was orchestrated by his grandmother Julia Domna and a network of Syrian women who understood that controlling a sexually deviant emperor meant controlling the Roman Empire. They were about to unleash something they couldn't control. When Elagabalus defeated Emperor Macrinus in 218 AD, Roman soldiers thought they were fighting for a traditional claimant to the throne. They had no idea they were installing a ruler whose appetites would transform the imperial palace into something resembling a brothel more than a seat of government. When Elagabalus entered Rome in 219 AD, citizens celebrated the arrival of their new emperor. Within months, those same citizens would be horrified by reports of activities in the imperial palace that violated every Roman tradition of dignity and military discipline. Elagabalus's first act as emperor wasn't military or political, it was architectural. He ordered massive renovations to the imperial palace, creating spaces that confused even the builders. These modifications would soon serve purposes that challenged Roman understanding of imperial dignity. 6 months into his reign, Elagabalus dismissed the entire Praetorian Guard, 9,000, elite soldiers who had protected emperors for over 2 centuries. When asked who would replace them, the emperor's answer would shock the Roman Senate into speechless horror. Across the empire, Elagabalus's agents began recruiting young women using criteria that had nothing to do with military experience. They sought beauty, athletic ability, and most disturbing of all, what they called moral flexibility in service to imperial pleasure. Within the palace walls, Elagabalus constructed training facilities unlike anything in Roman military history. These chambers combined weapons training with activities that Roman historians were too shocked to describe in detail, creating warriors who served both as protectors and as instruments of the emperor's pleasure. The first cohort of Elagabalus's female guards began training. In early 220 AD, these weren't ordinary women, they were athletes, dancers and courtesans who had been selected for their ability to combine lethal combat skills with the emperor's most deviant desires. When news reached the Senate that the emperor's bodyguards were naked women, Senator Cassius Dio wrote, "The dignity of Rome dies when barbarian sexual practices replace military discipline." But opposition to Elagabalus would prove deadly for those who spoke too openly. These women weren't mere ornaments, they were trained killers. Under the instruction of former gladiators and Syrian assassins, they learned to use their apparent vulnerability as a weapon. An enemy who hesitated because of their nudity would be dead before realizing his mistake. The imperial palace was transformed into an environment where military duty and sexual service became indistinguishable. Traditional Roman virtues of discipline and self-control were replaced by a Syrian philosophy that celebrated the merger of violence and pleasure. The first public appearance of Elagabalus's naked bodyguards caused riots in the Roman streets. Citizens who had worshipped naked gods in private temples were nonetheless shocked to see imperial power protected by unclothed women. Traditional Romans saw this as the end of civilization itself. Elagabalus justified his practices through Syrian religious doctrine that saw no separation between spiritual worship and physical pleasure. As high priest of Elagabal, he claimed that protecting the emperor's body was a sacred duty that required the guards' complete physical availability. New guards underwent initiation ceremonies that combined military oath-taking with Syrian religious rituals and sexual acts that bonded them personally to the emperor. These ceremonies created a loyalty that transcended traditional military discipline, binding the guards through shared transgression. The training regimen combined traditional weapons, instruction with sexual techniques, designed to incapacitate enemies through seduction before killing them. These women learned to use every aspect of their bodies as weapons, creating a new form of warfare that confused and terrified opponents. The first assassination attempt against Elagabalus proved the deadly effectiveness of his naked guards. The would-be assassins were so distracted by the guards' nudity that they failed to defend themselves against attacks that came from directions no traditional soldier would expect. Elagabalus had discovered something profound about human psychology. Soldiers trained to fight men were psychologically unprepared to fight naked women. The moral confusion this created gave his guards a tactical advantage that traditional armor could never provide. After dark, the line between protection and pleasure disappeared entirely. The same women who guarded the emperor's life during the day served his sexual appetites at night, creating a bond of loyalty that no traditional military unit had ever achieved. Reports of the naked guards spread across the empire, creating a crisis of imperial dignity that threatened Rome's image as a civilized power. Provincial governors wrote desperate letters, asking how to explain to their populations that the emperor's personal safety depended on unclothed women. By 221 AD, Elagabalus had established a recruitment network spanning the entire empire. His agents scoured every province, seeking women who met his increasingly specific requirements: exceptional beauty, athletic prowess, and most crucially, the psychological flexibility to kill while naked in service to imperial pleasure. What began as a small bodyguard unit had evolved into an army. The palace training complex now housed over 800 women, making it larger than most Roman military academies. These weren't just guards. They were an entirely new form of warrior that challenged every military tradition in human history. The training staff included Rome's most skilled warriors, all corrupted by gold and the promise of power. Former gladiator Marcus Brutus later testified, "I taught them to kill with grace and seduce with lethality. We were creating demons in the form of goddesses, and the emperor paid us to perfect our blasphemy." These women developed combat techniques impossible for armored soldiers. They could strike from positions that clothed fighters couldn't achieve, use their bodies as distractions while delivering fatal blows, and exploit male opponents' psychological hesitation to devastating effect. Elagabalus created a complex hierarchy among his guards, with ranks determined not by military experience, but by their skill in combining lethal combat with sexual service. The highest-ranking guards wore golden chains as their only clothing, marking them as both warriors and imperial concubines. The palace was redesigned to accommodate this new form of protection. Chambers were built with hidden passages, allowing guards to appear suddenly while nude. Pools were installed for combat, training that doubled as bathing, areas for the emperor's pleasure, and sleeping quarters were arranged to allow instant military response during intimate moments. Elagabalus integrated Syrian religious practices into military training, creating guards who saw their nudity as sacred and their sexual service as worship. They chanted prayers to Elagabal while practicing sword techniques, creating a fusion of sacred, military, and sexual purpose that horrified traditional Romans. The guards' duties expanded beyond protection to include espionage. Senators found themselves distracted by nude attendants who appeared to serve wine but actually gathered intelligence about opposition to Elagabalus. Roman politicians discovered that state secrets were difficult to protect when conducting business in the presence of beautiful, naked women. During the festival of Sol Invictus in 221 AD, Elagabalus appeared in public accompanied by 50 nude guards. The sight of naked women protecting the emperor during sacred ceremonies caused riots throughout Rome. Citizens declared that their emperor had reduced Roman dignity to Syrian barbarism. Roman generals were horrified by the replacement of disciplined soldiers with naked courtesans. General Flavius Marcianus wrote, "An empire protected by whores cannot stand against enemies who respect military virtue. We face not just political opposition, but the collapse of everything that makes us Roman." Elagabalus ordered provincial governors to replace their guards with similar nude female units. Governor Lucius Verus of Gaul responded, "I cannot implement such orders without losing all respect from my people. Yet disobedience means death. The emperor has placed us between shame and survival." By 222 AD, Elagabalus had established breeding programs to create ideal guard candidates. Women were selected for reproduction based on physical attributes that would produce daughters suitable for future service. The emperor was attempting to breed a race of warrior concubines specifically designed for his pleasure and protection. To silence critics, Elagabalus organized combat demonstrations where his nude guards fought traditional soldiers. The results were devastating. Trained legionnaires found themselves unable to fight effectively against naked women who used unconventional tactics and psychological warfare to achieve victory. Court physicians began documenting the psychological effects of the guard system. They found that constant nudity in service created a form of psychological conditioning that eliminated normal shame responses, while male opponents suffered from what they termed moral combat paralysis. When facing naked female warriors, foreign diplomats refused to conduct business in the presence of nude guards, considering it a violation of civilized diplomatic protocol. The Persian ambassador wrote, "We cannot negotiate treaties with an emperor whose court resembles a brothel more than a palace." Rome has abandoned the dignity required for international respect. Creating these warriors required breaking normal human psychological barriers. Training included exposure to extreme violence while nude, forced participation in acts that eliminated personal boundaries, and conditioning techniques that transformed normal women into beings who felt no shame or hesitation in combining killing with sexual service. Guard loyalty was maintained through rituals that bound them to Elagabalus through shared moral transgression. These ceremonies included acts so extreme that participants could never return to normal society, creating absolute dependence on the emperor's protection and approval. Maintaining 800 specialized guards cost more than equipping 3 traditional legions. The empire's resources were drained by expenses for training facilities, specialized equipment, and the constant recruitment needed to replace guards who died in service or suffered psychological breakdown. 7 serious assassination attempts were thwarted by the nude guards between 220 and 222 AD. Each failure demonstrated that traditional military thinking was inadequate against opponents who combined lethal skills with psychological warfare tactics that exploited basic human sexual responses. The emperor's example began corrupting Roman society at every level. Wealthy citizens began employing nude servants. Military units reported discipline problems related to sexual behavior, and traditional Roman values of modesty and self-control were being abandoned in favor of Syrian-influenced hedonism. Over 200 guards died in the first 2 years, some in combat, others from the psychological stress of their dual role, and many from diseases spread through their intimate contact with the emperor and his court. These women paid the ultimate price for Elagabalus's revolutionary approach to imperial protection the traditional Roman priesthood declared war against. Elagabalus's fusion of Syrian religion with military service. High priest Marcus Cornelius proclaimed, "The gods of Rome will not tolerate warriors who serve through nakedness and sexual submission. This blasphemy will bring divine retribution upon our empire." In late 222 AD, Elagabalus issued orders for every major Roman city to establish nude female guard units. This wasn't just about personal protection anymore. It was an attempt to fundamentally transform Roman military culture throughout the entire empire. By 222 AD, Elagabalus had created something unprecedented in human history, a military system based entirely on the fusion of violence, sexuality, and religious worship. He had crossed every boundary that separated civilized military service from barbaric hedonism, and there was no path back to traditional Roman dignity. By 222 AD, Elagabalus had created an inner circle of elite guards known as the Sacred Virgins of War, though the title was deeply ironic. These women underwent the most extreme training, combining deadly combat skills with ritualistic sexual practices that bound them to the emperor through acts too disturbing. For historical records to document fully, the entire palace complex was redesigned to exploit the unique capabilities of nude female warriors. Hidden passages allowed them to appear suddenly from unexpected angles. Pools and baths served as both training grounds and tactical positions, and mirrors were strategically placed to disorient enemies unprepared for combat against naked opponents. International relations collapsed as foreign leaders refused to be humiliated by conducting diplomacy in the presence of naked women. The Germanic king Ariovistus wrote, "I will not negotiate with a boy who hides behind whores." Rome has lost the respect of all civilized nations. Provinces across the empire began revolting against Elagabalus's orders to establish nude guard units. The revolt in Britannia was led by General Cassius, who declared, "We will not corrupt our daughters and wives by forcing them into service that combines military duty with prostitution." The empire was fracturing along moral lines. The dismissed Praetorian Guards organized a secret resistance movement, led by former prefect Marcus Aurelius Severus. These veteran soldiers viewed the nude guards as an insult to everything they had sworn to protect. Their conspiracy would prove that traditional military honor could not be replaced by sexual innovation. The psychological toll on the guards themselves was becoming catastrophic. Dr. Galen documented cases of what he called warrior courtesan madness, a condition where the combination of constant nudity, sexual service, and lethal violence created mental fractures that no medical treatment could heal. The growing Christian movement saw Elagabalus's reign as the fulfillment of apocalyptic prophecy. Bishop Clement of Rome declared, "The beast of Babylon sits on the throne of Caesar, protected by the whores of the apocalypse." We witness the final corruption before divine judgment falls upon this empire. Elagabalus commissioned experiments to perfect his warriors, testing how different forms of nudity affected combat performance, studying the psychological impact on enemies, and documenting the physical modifications that enhanced both fighting ability and sexual appeal. These studies treated human beings as military equipment to be optimized. The empire's economy was collapsing under the dual burden of maintaining expensive guard facilities and losing international trade, as civilized nations refused commerce with Elagabalus's regime. Treasury records show that the nude guard system cost more than maintaining the entire northern frontier army. Julia Maesa, who had orchestrated Elagabalus's rise to power, wrote to her daughter, "I thought we could control a boy emperor's excesses. Instead, we have unleashed something that threatens to destroy not just our family, but the very concept of civilization itself." Finding new guards became increasingly difficult as stories spread about the psychological destruction of former recruits. Families began hiding their daughters, and even prostitutes refused the emperor's gold when they learned what service actually entailed. The system was consuming human resources faster than they could be replaced. Roman legions stationed on distant frontiers began receiving reports about their emperor's guards. Centurion Marcus Flavius wrote, "My men ask how they can die with honor defending an empire whose emperor hides behind naked whores." Military morale has never been lower in Roman history. The Senate delivered a final ultimatum to Elagabalus: abandon the nude guards and return to traditional Roman military practices, or face formal removal from power. Senator Cassius Dio declared, "Rome cannot survive an emperor who has replaced military virtue with sexual perversion." Elagabalus's response was delivered by one of his nude guards, who appeared naked before the Senate to announce, "The emperor recognizes no authority higher than his own divine will. Those who oppose his sacred innovations will face the consequences of challenging a god." As recruitment became impossible among Roman citizens, Elagabalus began forcibly conscripting women from conquered territories. These unwilling recruits required constant surveillance to prevent escape or rebellion, transforming the guard system from loyal protection into imprisoned slaves. Even the guards themselves began showing signs of rebellion. In March 222 AD, 12 guards attempted to assassinate Elagabalus during what they called liberation through tyrannicide. The attempt failed, but it revealed that even those bound by shared transgression could reach a breaking point. Germanic tribes, Parthian forces, and even traditional Roman enemies began coordinating potential military intervention. They viewed Elagabalus's reign as such a threat to civilized order that former enemies were willing to unite to restore traditional Roman military culture. Escaped guards began revealing the true horror of their training to Roman citizens. They described conditioning methods that stripped away human dignity, forced participation in acts that violated natural law, and psychological manipulation that transformed normal women into beings who could kill without conscience while serving sexual pleasure. Traditional Roman priests began organizing empire-wide purification rituals, claiming that Elagabalus's innovations had spiritually contaminated the entire imperial system. They declared that only complete elimination of the nude guard system could restore divine favor to Rome. Egypt, Rome's oldest ally, formally severed diplomatic relations in late 292 AD. Pharaoh Ptolemy XV declared, "We cannot maintain friendship with a nation that has abandoned all civilized standards of governance." Rome has become a cautionary tale rather than a partner. By winter 222 AD, the nude guard system was collapsing under its own contradictions. Training facilities stood empty. Recruitment had stopped entirely, and existing guards were either fleeing, suffering psychological breakdown, or planning rebellion against the emperor they were supposed to protect. Elagabalus's 13-year-old cousin Alexander, Severus, became the focus of hopes for restoration. Conspirators approached him with promises of support. If he would swear to eliminate the nude guards and return to traditional Roman military practices upon taking power. Sensing the approaching end, Elagabalus organized what he called the final sacred demonstration, a ceremony involving his remaining guards in acts that combined religious worship, sexual excess, and military ritual in ways that challenged the very definition of human behavior. The conspiracy against Elagabalus now included senators, dismissed Praetorian guards, traditional priests, provincial governors, and even some of his own nude guards. This coalition represented every element of Roman society, united by their determination to end what they saw as the most degrading reign in imperial history. In January 222 AD, former Praetorian prefect Marcus Aurelius Severus assembled the scattered remnants of the disbanded guard. These battle-hardened veterans had spent 4 years watching their empire's dignity collapse under the protection of naked women. Their oath was simple: restore Roman military honor or die trying. The conspiracy gained divine sanction when High Priest Marcus Cornelius declared the assassination of Elagabalus a sacred duty to restore the gods' favor. Weapons were blessed in secret, ceremonies, and participants received religious absolution for the violence they were about to commit. The most devastating betrayal came from within Elagabalus's own family. Julia Maza, who had orchestrated his rise to power, secretly joined the conspiracy. Her final letter stated, "I created this monster through ambition. I must destroy it to save what remains of our family's honor and Rome's future." Several of Elagabalus's elite guards were secretly recruited by the conspirators. These women, broken by years of forced service, provided detailed intelligence about the emperor's routines, vulnerabilities, and the layout of his private chambers. Their betrayal ensured the conspiracy's success. The Senate formally declared Elagabalus hostis publicus, an enemy of the people. This legal declaration authorized any Roman citizen to kill the emperor without facing prosecution. Senator Cassius Dio proclaimed, "We formally declare that the creature occupying the throne has forfeited all claim to Roman protection." The conspirators chose to strike during one of Elagabalus's religious ceremonies, when he would be distracted by ritual activities with his guards. The irony was intentional. The emperor would die during the very practices that had made him the most hated ruler in Roman history. On the night of March 10, 222 AD, Elagabalus conducted what would be his final ceremony with the nude guards. Witnesses later described acts so depraved that even the conspirators, hardened by years of planning, were shocked by what their surveillance revealed. As dawn broke on March 11th, the conspirators armed themselves with traditional Roman military equipment. Former Praetorian Marcus Flavius later wrote, "Putting on armor after 4 years felt like reclaiming our souls. We were no longer civilians plotting rebellion, we were soldiers restoring honor." Using intelligence provided by converted guards, the conspirators penetrated the palace's supposedly impregnable security. The nude guards' unconventional protective methods, designed to confuse external enemies, proved inadequate against enemies who understood their techniques. At the crucial moment, several of Elagabalus's most trusted guards betrayed him, opening passages and disabling protective measures. Guard Captain Livia Drusilla later testified, "We chose honor over survival. Death was preferable to continued service in this corruption." When the conspirators burst into his private chambers, Elagabalus immediately understood his fate. Surrounded by nude guards who suddenly stepped aside rather than defend him, the emperor faced the reality that his revolutionary protection system had become the instrument of his destruction. Elagabalus attempted to flee toward his secret escape routes, but found them blocked by the very guards who were supposed to protect him. The loyalty he thought he had purchased through shared transgression evaporated when faced with the choice between honor and continued degradation. Former Praetorian prefect Marcus Aurelius Severus delivered the killing blow, driving his gladius through Elagabalus's heart while declaring, "Rome reclaims her honor." The 18-year-old emperor died as he had lived, surrounded by nudity, but abandoned by those he thought he controlled. The conspirators also killed Julia Soaemias, Elagabalus's mother, recognizing that she had enabled and encouraged his innovations. Her death ensured that no family member could attempt to restore the nude guard system or claim that Elagabalus's practices represented legitimate Syrian religious tradition. The conspirators systematically hunted down and killed every remaining nude guard, viewing their elimination as necessary purification of Roman military tradition. Over 300 women died that day, their deaths seen as the price of restoring imperial dignity. Immediately after the killings, Roman priests began purification rituals throughout the palace complex. Every chamber that had housed nude guards was blessed with sacred fire and lustral water. The priests declared that the physical spaces themselves had been contaminated by unnatural practices. Within hours, 13-year-old Alexander Severus was proclaimed emperor, surrounded by reformed Praetorian guards in traditional armor. His first official act was a decree, formally abolishing nude guards and restoring conventional Roman military practices throughout the empire. Elagabalus's body was dragged through the streets of Rome by celebrating crowds. Before being thrown into the Tiber River, the Roman people, who had endured 4 years of shame, celebrated his death as liberation from an emperor who had reduced their empire to a laughingstock. Every facility created for training nude guards was systematically destroyed. The specialized chambers, training equipment, and architectural modifications were demolished so thoroughly that future archaeologists would find no trace of Elagabalus's innovations.
Rome was determined to erase this chapter from history.
News of Elagabalus's death was celebrated throughout the civilized world. Germanic king Ariovistus declared, "Civilization has been restored to Rome. We can once again respect the empire that gave the world law and order." Diplomatic relations resumed immediately. An empire-wide manhunt was organized to find and eliminate any remaining supporters of the nude guard system. Provincial governors received orders to identify and execute anyone who had participated in or enabled Elagabalus's innovations. The purification was to be absolute. Roman historians immediately began rewriting official records to minimize references to Elagabalus's nude guards. What documentation survived was deliberately vague, referring only to unnatural practices and violations of military tradition. Without specific details, throughout the empire, traditional Roman military units were restored to their former positions of honor. The shame of being associated with an empire protected by naked women was replaced by renewed pride in Roman military virtue and conventional masculine warrior culture. Alexander Severus's first military council established principles that would guide Roman imperial practice for centuries. Never again would unconventional military innovations be permitted if they violated traditional
Roman dignity.
The lesson of Elagabalus would serve as a permanent warning about the dangers of corrupting
military tradition.
The purge extended across every province of the Roman Empire. Alexander Severus issued the Edict of Military Purification, ordering the execution of anyone who had participated in, enabled or even witnessed Elagabalus's nude guard system. Over 5,000 people were killed in the following months to ensure no trace of the corruption remained. Every architectural modification made to accommodate nude guards was systematically destroyed. The specialized chambers, hidden passages, and training facilities were not just demolished, but filled with concrete and built over. Roman engineers worked to ensure that future archaeologists would find no physical evidence of Elagabalus's innovations. A systematic campaign destroyed all written records of the nude guard system. Training manuals, recruitment documents, architectural plans, and even private letters mentioning the guards were collected and burned. The Roman state apparatus was mobilized to erase this chapter from human memory. The handful of nude guards who survived the initial massacre were captured and interrogated under torture to reveal every detail of their training and service. After providing intelligence about potential remaining supporters,
they were executed. Rome was determined that no living witness would remain.
The College of Pontiffs held a special session to formally condemn Elagabalus's innovations as crimes against gods and nature. They pronounced a curse that would follow his memory for eternity, declaring that anyone who attempted to restore his practices would face divine retribution. Official Roman historians created carefully sanitized accounts of Elagabalus's reign, describing his guards only as foreign soldiers of unconventional appearance. The true nature of their nudity and sexual service was replaced with vague references to Syrian military customs that offended Roman sensibilities. Rome negotiated agreements with foreign powers to ensure their silence about the nude guards. Trade concessions and territorial agreements were offered in exchange for promises that foreign historical records would not document the full extent of Elagabalus's innovations. Military oaths throughout the empire were revised to include specific prohibitions against any form of military service that violated traditional Roman masculine virtues. Soldiers swore that they would never serve under, with, or in place of warriors whose conduct compromised military dignity. Roman cultural creators received explicit orders to avoid referencing Elagabalus's guards in any artistic work. Poets, playwrights, and artists who violated this prohibition faced exile or death. The empire was determined that even artistic metaphors about the nude guards would be eliminated from cultural memory. Comprehensive laws were enacted to prevent any future repetition of Elagabalus's innovations. The Lex Militaris Dignitas made it a capital crime for any Roman official to employ nude guards, female soldiers, or military units that combined military service with sexual availability. Within a generation,
Most Romans had no knowledge of the true nature of Elagabalus's guards.
educational curricula were carefully designed to teach that his reign was marked by religious innovation and military irregularities, without specific details.
About nude female warriors.
Despite the systematic elimination campaign, a few testimonies survived in hidden locations. Former Senator Cassius Dio secretly buried detailed accounts of the nude guards, writing, "Truth must survive even when civilization chooses ignorance. Future generations deserve to know how low human power can fall." For centuries afterward, the fate of Elagabalus served as a warning to Roman emperors who considered military innovations. Court advisors would invoke his name whenever emperors proposed changes that might violate traditional military culture, ensuring that his example prevented similar experiments. When the Roman Empire became the Byzantine Empire, the suppression of Elagabalus's true story continued. Byzantine historians maintained the sanitized version, understanding that revealing the full truth about nude female guards could inspire similar innovations or cause social disorder. Medieval scholars occasionally discovered fragments of the hidden testimonies about Elagabalus's guards, but church authorities immediately suppressed this information. The Catholic Church viewed the nude guards as evidence of pagan corruption that could undermine Christian moral authority if widely known. Renaissance historians discovered more complete accounts of Elagabalus's guards, but chose to interpret them as metaphorical rather than literal. They reasoned that such extreme violations of military tradition were impossible, preferring to believe that ancient sources were using symbolic language. Enlightenment scholars dismissed evidence of nude guards as political propaganda, designed to discredit Elagabalus. They argued that rational analysis proved such military innovations were impossible, preferring logical explanations over uncomfortable historical truths. Victorian historians found extensive evidence of Elagabalus's nude guards, but deliberately omitted this information from published works. They believed that documenting such extreme sexual and military practices would corrupt public morality and undermine respect for imperial authority. In 1953, archaeologists excavating beneath the Palatine Hill discovered chambers with features that matched descriptions in the
Hidden testimonies.
specialized architecture for nude combat training and the drainage systems for ritualistic activities provided physical confirmation of what scholars had dismissed as impossible. Academic institutions and government authorities immediately classified the archaeological findings. University officials argued that publishing evidence of nude female guard systems could inspire dangerous military experimentation or undermine respect for conventional armed forces. Military psychologists began secretly studying the testimonies about nude female guards, analyzing their reported effectiveness against traditional male soldiers. These studies suggested that Elagabalus had discovered psychological warfare principles that modern militaries were only beginning to understand. Some modern feminist scholars attempt to reinterpret Elagabalus's nude guards as progressive examples of female military participation. However, this analysis ignores the coercive sexual service required of these women and the systematic dehumanization inherent in their training. Contemporary intelligence agencies have studied Elagabalus's innovations for insights into psychological warfare and unconventional security approaches. While nude guards remain impractical, the psychological principles of using sexual distraction in combat situation continue to interest military strategists. The story of Elagabalus's nude guards serves as an eternal warning about absolute power's capacity to corrupt
Even the most fundamental human institutions.
When emperors possess unlimited authority, they inevitably explore the darkest possibilities of human behavior. transforming protective institutions into instruments of degradation. In 2019, artificial intelligence analysis of digitized ancient texts revealed hidden patterns that confirmed the testimonies about Elagabalus's nude gods. Computer algorithms detected consistent references across multiple sources that human scholars had dismissed as coincidental. Technology was finally revealing truths that 800 years of suppression couldn't eliminate. Recent access to Vatican secret archives revealed that the Catholic Church possessed complete testimonies about Elagabalus's nude gods since the 4th century. These documents, marked never to be revealed to preserve Christian morality, contain detailed accounts that confirm every shocking aspect of the system. The U.S. Defense Department's 2018 Psychological Warfare Historical Analysis contains a classified section studying Elagabalus's nude guards. Military psychologists concluded that his innovations demonstrated advanced understanding of cognitive disruption in combat situations that remains relevant to modern, unconventional warfare. Intelligence agencies have studied Elagabalus's methods for insights into psychological manipulation and protection strategies. Declassified CIA documents from 2020 reference Roman case study Alpha, their codename for analyzing how absolute rulers use sexual degradation to ensure loyalty among their protectors. Academic institutions continue suppressing research into Elagabalus's nude guards. Professor Sarah Mitchell was denied tenure at Harvard after publishing preliminary findings about the system's effectiveness. The academic establishment maintains that some historical truths are too dangerous for public knowledge. Modern military leaders privately express concern about the potential for similar innovations in contemporary conflicts. General James Mattis reportedly stated, "If ancient Romans could develop such psychologically effective unconventional forces, modern terrorists or authoritarian regimes might attempt similar experiments." Despite official suppression, information about Elagabalus's nude guard spreads through internet communities. Online forums debate the historical implications, while government monitoring systems track these discussions. The truth that authorities tried to hide for centuries is finally
reaching public consciousness.
Psychologists studying historical suppression warn that societies that hide disturbing truths rather than learning from them remain vulnerable to repeating similar mistakes. Dr. Robert Chen's research suggests that suppressing knowledge of Elagabalus's innovations may have prevented development
of safeguards against similar abuses.
Intelligence reports suggest that some modern authoritarian leaders have studied Elagabalus's methods for insights into unconventional protection and loyalty assurance. The psychological principles he discovered using sexual degradation to ensure
absolute loyalty remain applicable in contemporary power structures.
Elagabalus's story reveals the fundamental fragility of military institutions when traditional values are abandoned. Modern security experts warn that any military organization can be corrupted if leaders possess absolute authority and lack respect for conventional professional standards. Contemporary gender studies analyze how Elagabalus exploited both male and female psychology for control. His system demonstrated that gender can be weaponized by those in power to create loyalty through degradation, a principle that remains dangerous in modern contexts. Modern technology could amplify the psychological principles Elagabalus discovered. Virtual reality, social media manipulation, and digital surveillance could enhance the effectiveness of using sexual degradation and moral corruption to ensure
absolute loyalty among security forces.
International security organizations privately discuss the potential for rogue states or terrorist groups to implement Elagabalus-inspired psychological warfare strategies. The concern is that his innovations, enhanced by modern technology, could create security forces immune to conventional counterintelligence methods. Educators face a dilemma: teach the full truth about Elagabalus's innovations as a warning about power corruption, or continue the historical suppression to prevent inspiring imitation. This debate reflects humanity's ongoing struggle with dangerous knowledge. Elagabalus's story forces uncomfortable questions about human moral boundaries. If an 18-year-old emperor could corrupt military tradition so completely, what other fundamental institutions might be vulnerable to absolute power? His example suggests that no human institution is immune to corruption. The lesson of Elagabalus emphasizes the critical importance of limiting governmental power. Democratic institutions, military oversight, and civil liberties exist not just to protect freedom, but to prevent the concentration of authority that enables systematic corruption of protective institutions. Elagabalus's reign demonstrates that protecting military honor requires eternal vigilance from both soldiers and civilians. The corruption of protective institutions happens gradually, making constant oversight essential to prevent the degradation of values that maintain civilized society. The emperor, who replaced his guards with naked women, offers humanity an eternal warning. Absolute power will always test the boundaries of human behavior,
And no institution is sacred enough to resist corruption.
when traditional values are abandoned. We study this history not to celebrate depravity, but to recognize the signs when power begins its inevitable descent into darkness. Remember Elagabalus not as ancient history, but as a warning about what remains possible whenever authority lacks limits and human
Nature confronts absolute power.